Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone to our work session, July 21st. First thing we need to do is call the Pledge of Allegiance to order by Ms. Tammy Sharp.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Ms. Sharp.
Welcome.
All right. Next will be a moment of silence. If you would please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. All right. Any questions on the agenda? Anything on the consent agenda? Okay, we'll recognize visitors tomorrow night. Number 7 will be recognition.
All right, first I'd like to take the opportunity to personally thank Mr. Tim Tackett, a longtime educator in our system, who was our part-time athletics director. He also served as an assistant principal and a principal. But we've been very fortunate during the process of hiring our new director of athletics. A lot of great candidates that applied, and there was 2 that was submitted to me after the interview. The initial interview, I interviewed them, and we came up with, I can't think of a better person to fit this position. I've known of him or known him for a long time, and that's Mr. Chris Harris. Coach, would you come on up? Let me give you just a little rundown on Coach Harris. I'd like to brag on him. First of all, in 1982, I think you were a sophomore, or you?
I was a senior.
You're a senior in 1982 at Vanderbilt Gymnasium. Chris and his teammates from MTSU defeated University of Kentucky, and that was a big surprise and a big upset because Kentucky was supposed to be scheduled to be playing Louisville the next day, but you guys got that opportunity. So, Mr. Harris, you want to go ahead and tell us a little bit any more things about yourself, because I think you do have a wide range of abilities and talents that you've picked up.
Yeah, that was quite an experience for all of us. And first of all, I want to thank Mr. Spurlock for this opportunity, and of course, thank Mr. Tackett. He's been a tremendous help to me, and he's been quite a servant to Rutherford County in terms of athletics, especially getting this position started. Anytime you're trying to start a athletic director position for the first time, that's a very difficult task. So for him to take that on, a lot of recognition needs to go to him. He's been very helpful to me in this transition, so I really want to thank him for that. And I've been in Rutherford County for 27 years. I've known quite a few people here in this county, and I've been reaching out to quite a few people who've been very helpful to me. But I started out at Smyrna High School. My first teaching job was at Gallatin High School in 1992. And that's how I got involved in basketball. But when I transferred, I got to Smyrna High School, so that's where I got there as assistant basketball coach, Riverdale as a head coach at Holloway, and then I opened up Siegel High School as a head coach there. I stepped down in 2008, and I've been teaching at Siegel High School for the entire time. But I've been involved in athletics. I've also mentored some coaches, and I've got that itch back. I'm excited about being around athletics again. I've been throughout the county, been talking to coaches, and I know what they deal with every day. I know what it feels like to be an assistant coach. I know what it feels like to be a volunteer coach. And I know what it feels like to care about athletes, these young people, these students, and we want to make sure they're getting the best equipment, the best things that they need to continue in their activities. And one thing I strive for is for them to be students first. That's the biggest thing that I focus on. They're student athletes. And I appreciate all the things that you all do for our county, the school board, and I know you care about the students here in this county, and I want to continue that tradition here as your athletic director.
Any board members got any comments?
Happy to have you.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
Welcome aboard. All right, number 8.
All right, number 8, naming of Riverdale High School Fieldhouse. Riverdale High School would like to honor former principal of Rutherford County Schools Director Ulan Watson by naming their newest facility the Ulan Watson Football Fieldhouse. Mr. Watson was inducted into the Riverdale High School Football Hall of Fame for being credited with the development of Riverdale football into an annual championship contender.
Any comments? Anything any board member like to say?
I'm just personally thrilled that we can do this. It's been a long journey to get the field house up, and Hewlin Watson was honored when he was called and told him. So I hope everyone can make it. It's going to be a tremendous night, not just for the Riverdale community, but for this Rutherford County community.
Do you have a date on that?
August the 13th, right after the football scrimmage, the two Kreisky versus Kreisky, and and then everybody's going to head up to the field house.
Moving on to number 9.
All right, number 9, legal YMCA contract renewal. YMCA is requesting the renewal of their agreement with Rutherford County Schools to continue before and after school fun company programs. The YMCA has extended its standing discounts for employees. The YMCA will pay $2 per week per child based on the average number of children in attendance each week. This agreement would run until July 1st of 2025. Offhand, we've got how many in our system? I know Smyrna Elementary, Cedar Grove, Stewartsboro?
I believe at this point they're in every element.
Everyone?
Yes.
Okay, so that's great. It's a great, I think it provides a great service. I've actually had taken advantage of that when my daughter was going through school, so I think it provides a great service to our community.
Any questions or comments? All right. Moving on to number 2.
All right, number 2, policy adoption on first and final reading. The below policy changes are recommended on the first and final reading due to the state law requiring these to be in effect beginning of the 2021-2022 school year. A, policy 1.801, emergency closings, and remove the language regarding designating certain employees essential made illegal by Public Chapter 384. B, policy 3.205, security, added new cybersecurity requirements from Public Chapter 335 and cleaned up the language. C, policy 4.301, interscholastic athletics, updated to include requirements of Public Chapters 40 and 272, which limits sports to biological sex and requires code of conduct for coaches and training related to severe weather and other safety protocols. D, policy 4.605, graduation requirements, reduces the number of credits needed to graduate early under the Move On When Ready Act from 18 to 17 credits per Public Chapter 493. E, policy 5.106, application and employment, included language regarding temporary teaching permits now allowed by law and a general cleanup. F, policy 5.117, teacher tenure, full rewrite to clarify the process and address frequently asked questions, including how to determine eligibility in light of hold harmless and non-scored years. G, policy 5.802, qualifications and duties of director of schools, including reporting duties now required for temporary teaching permits and general cleanup. H, policy 6.200, attendance, changes to match Public Chapter 223. I, policy 6.402, physical examination and immunizations, added exception related to COVID-19 pursuant to Public Chapter 513. J, Policy 3.220, access to private facilities, creates general structure and authority to establish procedures to comply with Public Chapter 452. K, Policy 4.101, instructional standards, lays out recent legislative limitations on instructional standards. L, Policy 4.213, family life education, required to be adopted by Public Chapter 290, previously only required for counties with high teen pregnancy rate, now required for all districts. Coordinated school health confirmed this policy is in line with current practices. All right, recommended motion to approve on two motions. Policy recommended motion on two motions. Motion to suspend Board Policy 1.60, specifically to suspend the two reading requirements to the above policies as presented, and to adopt the first and final reading on the above policies as presented. 3, policy adoption, first reading of two readings. The below policies are recommended on first reading. These policies will be brought to the next scheduled regular board meeting for a second and final reading. A, Policy 4.406, use of internet, updated some language and changed opt-in to opt-out for technology use. B, Policy 4.700, testing programs. There was a small addition to ensure compliance with Public Chapters 271, requiring CTE opportunities to be shared with students after they complete aptitude assessments. C, Policy 5.200, separation practices for tenured teachers, changes the authority from the commissioner to the state board as it relates to who may suspend teacher's license for breach of contract. D, Policy 5.201, separation practice for non-tenured teachers, including modification to non-renewal notice delivery law, and changes the authority from the commissioner to the state board as it relates to who may suspend a teacher's license for breach of contract. E, Policy 6.300, Code of Conduct, incorporates the aspects of Teacher Discipline Act to Public Chapter 77. F, Policy 6.306, interference, disruption of school activities, is a nearly full rewrite, incorporates aspects of Teacher Discipline Act, Public Chapter 77. G, Policy 6.4081, safe relocation of students, incorporates aspects of the Teacher Discipline Act, Public Chapter 77. H, Policy 1.2021, Boardmanship Code of Conduct, establishes a general code of conduct for board members recommended by the TSBA. I, Policy 1.900, Charter School Authorizing Principles, fundamental policy to establish new section of policies in the event the district gains a charter school. J, Policy 1.902, Charter School Agreements, fundamental policy regarding charter school agreements for a new section of policies in the event the district gains a charter school. K, Policy 1.903, Charter School Oversight, fundamental policy regarding charter school oversight for new section of policies in the event the district gains a charter school. I, Policy 1.904, Charter School Intervention, fundamental policy regarding charter school intervention and remedies for a new section of policies in the event the district gains a charter school. M, Policy 1.905, Charter School Renewal, fundamental policy regarding charter school approval agreement renewals for a new section of policies in the event the district gains a charter school. N, Policy 1.906, Charter School Revocation, fundamental policy regarding charter school revocation for a new section of policies in the event the district gains a charter school. And then O, Policy 6.202, Homeschools, replaces previous homeschool policy.
Okay, board, any questions? We're all good? Okay, we'll move on to number 10.
Our number 10 is our 2020-2021 summer tenure recommendation. The following teachers meet the criteria for tenure in accordance with new tenure law. They hold a valid Tennessee teacher license, have served Rutherford County Schools for a minimum of 5 years or 45 months within the 7-year period, and the last 2 in a regular, not interim position. They've established or demonstrated an overall performance of above expectations or significantly above expectation on the team evaluation during the last 2 consecutive years of the 5-year period, or if held tenure under the previous guidelines and return to Rutherford County Schools, meet the 2-year probationary period and tenure is reactivated. So as you can see there, the names and the position are listed along with the school.
Any questions on tenure? All right, hearing none, move to number 11.
All right, number 11, courses offered for credit in grades 9 and 12 for the 2020-22 school year, found on tab 4. The instruction department is requesting permission to offer the courses listed in the attachment for the 2021-2022 school year under the following guidelines. Board of Education Policy 4.201 states in part, a listing of courses offered for credit in grades 9 and 12 will be approved annually by the board.
Any questions? Okay, number 12.
All right, is the Rethink Forward application, are we going to start with you, Dr. Sullivan?
I believe so.
Okay, go ahead.
Good evening, Board. I think you have several items in front of you that I'm going to look at. The first one, if you wouldn't mind, I'm an educator, so all I know how to do is to teach. That's just my natural. If you'll look at this portion right here, it just has the agenda. This is kind of what we're going to cover. I know looking at it originally, it looks very lengthy, but I'm going to simplify it and kind of go through what the task at hand is. So at first, just what our overall purpose is, we're going to review that in anticipation with all this material for tomorrow for you to make one of 2 decisions. One of those to approve Rethink Charter's application or to deny Rethink Charter's application. That decision rests with the board tomorrow. So I'm going to go over some of that information. And looking at our purpose on the second page, if you'll flip over, we have, again, our Rutherford County Charter Committee. I want to thank our committee members who were made up of, this board approved and made up of multiple people in our education system, but also outside. We do not have a charter school office as other districts do, and they took time out of their normal operating duties to perform this task, so we're very thankful for them. Again, you kind of see what our purpose is to review all those and then make a recommendation to the board. The third item then, just what is a charter school? Charter schools are public schools operated by an independent, nonprofit governing body. In Tennessee, public charter school students are measured against the same academic standards, so the Tennessee state standards, as students in other public schools. And then you see that very next part, local boards, and your role then would be ensure these charters open and remain open and are meeting the needs of their students. And you do this through the authorization and application process. On the next slide, this again goes through telling you what your options are for tomorrow and kind of giving you that timeline. If the application is approved, Rutherford County School Board and the applicant will enter into a chartering agreement. If it's denied, the sponsor and applicant will have 30 days to resubmit the amended application to the Rutherford County Schools Director of Schools, Mr. Bill Spurlock. The next one is the scoring rubric. The Tennessee Department of Education has a uniform scoring rubric that we use, and this is what our committee used in scoring the application, and that's what all references will be at this point forward, is to the application received. You will see there are 3 different ratings. The first one meets or exceeds the standard, and then the next 2 partially meets the standard or does not meet the standard. And those have blue beside them because if a category or a section, does not have one of those 2, then they would have to come back and then reconvene and submit information for those. But again, the first one being the goal. The overview, here's just some overview information. The proposed school name, Rutherford Collegiate Prep. The sponsor is Rethink Forward. Rethink Forward has proposed a charter management organization, which is very common, a CMO. That is Noble Education Initiative. The proposed opening is fall 2022. Enrollment at capacity is 770 K8. They are applying to start with K5 at the beginning. Location is North Rutherford County, but zoning with any school for charter school would be open to the entire students. Next, I just wanted to guide you through 4 sections. That is the overall charter rubric. There are 4 sections, the first one being academic, plan, design, and capacity. That has 12 different components. Section 2 is about operations, plant, and capacity. Section 3 is fiscal, and that has 3 components, and then Section 4, 1 component is for past performance. All right, so this is just an overview quickly of the 12 categories in Section 1. I am not going to hit on all of these. You have a copy of what our committee's scoring for each committee was. That is the other document that you have that has the Tennessee Department of Application. It looks like this. But I'm going to hit on some highlight strengths and concerns that the committee had throughout. So on the very next slide, you will see it has Section 1, Academic Plan Design and Capacity. These are just looking at overall, our committee compiled, we met initially, we then met again in July and had a summary of our findings, and these are just some summaries of our findings. Some strengths on this first one, and we're looking at 1.1 through 1.4. The mission, vision, goals are aligned to RCS vocabulary. Core values are aligned to academic, social, and emotional. There is a use of an instructional PLC model and the required middle school C2E component. A concern that we had on this section was enrollment actually decreases as we add grade bands on the progression table. So just a concern, how and why is the school actively looking to remove kids from previous grade bands? For example, you may go from 80 kids in the 5th grade to then the 6th grade go down to 75, and that would be an attrition in a growing district, just a concern. On the next section, on the very next slide, you have another strength, the instructional minutes and chronic absenteeism, a yearly goal of a double AMO, and the instructional minutes follow TDOE expectations for each grade band, if not exceed them. Some concerns, that first one, the rationale for this charter is based on Rutherford County Collegiate Prep would immediately differentiate itself from existing schools just by simply being a charter. If you look at one of your roles, with Tennessee Code Annotated 4913-108, that really talks about your ability as a board. You may consider whether the establishment of a proposed charter school will have a substantial negative fiscal impact on the LEA, and it keeps going, or if a local Board of Education's decision to deny a public charter school is based on substantial negative impact. You are also looking at it for that charter school may not approve, in which they would have a substantial impact on the school community. And there's a lot of extra wording in there that I'll have a copy for you tomorrow, but that's one thing we're looking at in that law. A couple other little concerns on this section. There is a presentation of data. The data focuses largely on student success rate, to where those schools in the northern end of the county, and even as a county, outperform the state average. As a district, we are a level 5 district with our schools operating out and above not only our state, but many of our local districts that surround us. And so showing a need for that type of entity when we have other school choice options was a concern. If you'll go to the next section, academic plan concerns, just some concerns we had here. We had a mention of a guaranteed and viable curriculum. We know with curriculum we follow Tennessee state standards. We asked for a sample of the curriculum and were asked back if we wanted specifics. Well, as a public entity, we have to have our curriculum linked, and we would have expected a easy share of information in that same time, which we were not able to review. Another thing to look at, test specifications were mentioned as a way of understanding what students are expected to learn. That is a highly classified document that educators are not privy to from the Tennessee Department of Education, and actually how TCAP items are written. Those are for item vendors and how item writers are able to use those. That brings into question a conflict of interest, since you have a Tennessee Department of Education person on this board. And so that was a concern in mentioning those items. Science and social studies were not mentioned in the grade 6 through 8 academic plan. And then the reading curriculum is not state approved, nor did the vendor ask to be state approved for this past cycle with Ready. We use Ready and Curriculum Associates for math. They were not on the vendor approved list for the last section. On the next slide, section 1.5 and 1.6 are not applicable. Again, 1.5, we don't have any schools on the priority list, so that will not be applicable. This is a K-8 school, so it will not be applicable. Section 1.7 dealt with strengths, and this is looking at assessment. The assessment calendar, they have a very rigorous framework presentation in the application based on their instructional focus calendar, which takes different benchmark assessments, summative assessments, and is a very rigorous process. They have a data review process that they talk about that very much mirrors our professional learning process that we use in Rutherford County. The school calendar not only meets the required 180 days, it exceeds the 180 days. It has multiple professional development opportunities built in for teachers that we'll hit on in another section, so there are definite strengths here with the academic calendar and the framework. They show an extensive knowledge of assessments and ability to support special student population identification. You see a student handbook, school culture, grading policies, that was all included as well. The concerns that we had for this one, again, is that continued emphasis on iReady for assessments, which is not an approved vendor. You see on that fourth bullet point, this was a concern. Extracurricular activities mentioned that staff members set price and receive a portion of the money from fees paid. This very much is in a high needs area proposed, and having staff members set the price for extracurricular activities was a huge concern for our committee. In looking at ESL, there were some misinterpretations of standards. For example, we are a WIDA state. WIDA standards were not mentioned. And then in identification in ELs, there were some concerns with the service structure. If you go to the next one, you'll see, again, we're following sections 1.7 to 1.12. Some strengths, there are multiple tutoring opportunities, Saturday school, extended school opportunities, extended school day. That extended school day allows for more instructional minutes that are provided in a typical 7-hour day. Some concerns, and I'll look at just the third bullet, some concerns about a universal code of appearance, because in the application it mentions that they must use that predetermined vendor. Again, in a high needs area, using a school vendor for school uniforms was a concern for our committee. Fourth one, field trips. We allow all students as a requirement to attend field trips because they have an educational responsibility. However, if a student has an outstanding financial obligation, they would not be able to attend according to this obligation. And so those were just a couple areas. One that was a concern, that is because it's a requirement of the application, there has to be a letter of support from community members. All letters of support were from past operations, not from anything in the Rutherford County community, parents, community members, or teachers. If you go to the next section, this is just an academic and overview of this whole section. You will see that the committee looked at the application and had several of them that did not meet the standard, a couple that met the standard, and one that met the standard. For section 1, the committee rated that as a does not meet standard. We will go to section 2. We are looking at operations plan and capacity, so not necessarily instruction, but more of building related, HR, professional developments, insurance. Some strengths on the next side. There is that preset board with some experience. You have a university president, a lawyer and a lobbyist, an educator. You do have that director of the State Board of Education. That is that potential conflict of interest. There are annual metrics reported, and they do plan on using in the application the team evaluation model. Part of being a charter school is a charter is still held to TCAP in those assessments, so that would be published just like any normal operating public school. Some concerns, there are some concerns in looking at this relationship between Rethink Forward, Noble Education Initiative, and then Charter Schools USA, which is a for-profit organization. These organizations appear to be connected and would be connected with curriculum as well. If you look on that second bullet, curriculum professional development model are all following under that NEI model. There's a diversity component that's required in E-Plan of all districts that is missing. I know that's not part of this necessarily application, but it is mentioned as one of the concerns that was brought apart by our committee. The second section, if you look at 2.2, there's very much a detailed startup timeline and flexibility to timeline to 22, 23, 23, 24 if needed. Mr. Bodery is going to talk about the startup financials, but there were some concerns about the operating timeline from a financial standpoint, so I'll skip that section next. If we go to 2.3. 2.3 is looking at just an overall plan and facility. The overall plan outlines a very workable facility, plan with ADA accommodations for building that will be leased. But again, a part of that operations plan, the committee is concerned about the financial aspect and the building plan, the reality of where that would be located. There is no building or architect design to review, so for us to review about what that looks like was hard for our committee to be able to do. 2.4, I don't believe was applicable. 2.5, sorry. Going to the next one, 2.5. There is a adequate list of employees included. The interviewing and hiring policy was strong, especially for the instructional leader, how that process was going to be vetted. Again, that third one, the school leader selection process, the mentor program, and then recruitment. There was a very strong recruitment strategy, not just for educators, but also for students. Some concerns noted were the no teacher contract, so at will. In the first 90 days or an intro period, and a teacher can resign or rethink can terminate without cause or notice. Definitely could skew retention numbers and concerns about making sure we were hitting some of those diversity goals mentioned earlier. The committee felt that the lack of adequate support staff, many support with our special populations was contracted services, and not having that support staff in a high needs area was a concern. The projected student population denotes a need again for more special education, et cetera, positions. And then for teachers, a lack of a pay scale step. 2.6, a strong PD selection. In fact, their calendar includes an expanded PD for educators as part of the calendar. So instead of having the traditional 200-day calendar that is required by the Tennessee Department of Education, the applicant has extra 15 or 10 days depending on the operator year, or depending on the operations year in which teachers come back and receive professional development throughout the year. They have a PLC model, social emotional learning connected, but again, concerned about that only model of PD is between the Rethink Forward and the organization Noble Education Initiative that was mentioned earlier. The summer PD, 10 to 15 days, is extensive without a lot of time for absorption or practice for our educators. If you look at 2.7, strengths, minimum coverage requirements are met for insurance. The insurance does a concern, of course we have educators on this committee, was not at the level that Rutherford County Schools currently offers, and that was just the only concern mentioned. 2.8, transportation services are provided to some extent. However, this could be a challenge, especially in this area of poverty. The applicant mentions that they are going to be targeting private school parents, but also parents in this area and throughout Rutherford County, and is proposing to provide transportation within a 2 to 4 mile basis. Rutherford County, of course, offers transportation to the zone school for the entire county, and based on more than 35% of our students taking transportation, 3 buses didn't seem like enough in that budget. 2.9 was about nutrition, part of the National School Lunch Program, and these are other operations. Had a concern about that was definitely a strength, same standards that we follow. Concern, it allocates only $500 in the operating budget of medical supplies for a $470 student body. And funding charter school potentially with nursing services from unidentified grants. 2.10. Strengths, you have selected NEI as the CMO with a performance-based service agreement due to their track record in charter schools, and there is a division of roles listed and indemnification process. However, continue to be concerned with the NEI's experience with turnaround schools. Again, we are a very high-performing district, and the ability to be successful and not detract from the education our students are already getting in Rutherford County. Management is contracted, so anytime you're working on that type of contract, that committee was concerned about the benefit not necessarily being the students, but meeting certain goals. And then the last section is 2.11. 2.11 was about waivers. We did not note any strengths with the waivers. There were 10 waivers identified. The waivers were not felt to be needed, considering Rutherford County is a high-performing district. The textbook waivers and curriculum and instructional material waivers were a noted concern, especially with the attention on curriculum and instruction right now to ensure high-quality materials focused on Tennessee state standards. Relinquishing that control to an outside entity for our Rutherford County students was a concern of the committee. Then the last sections, 212 through 215, based on the letter from the commissioner and the application status, those sections weren't required. So 212 through 216. Sections 2, operations plan and capacity. The charter committee actually scored that as a partially meet standard. And then section 3, financial planning capacity, has 2 sections, and I'm going to turn that over to Mr. Bovary.
If you have in front of you, the charter committee did include in the packet, which is the state required budget in detail, and to not go through all that, which I have reviewed it all, and I just wanted to hit some highlights with you as the board, just for some of the concerns that we've seen. In front of you is, I've got just 4 pages from that budget document. And if you'd like to follow along with me, we'll just hit on a couple high notes here. If you'll turn to page 2 of that 4-page packet that you have with the budget numbers, the charter school has provided us with a pre-opening budget for the fiscal year 21-22. They'll actually plan on their pre-opening budget when they'll actually start this current fiscal year. So their plan, as you can see, is they will be hiring on some principal, an assistant principal, and just some clerical staff for this school on January 1 of 2022. It's just like somewhat similar to like what we've done with Plainview, that we came before you with a budget amendment to hire on some staff for Plainview Elementary for the fiscal year, for last fiscal year, as we ramped up to begin operations and with the students in the building this fiscal year. They're doing something somewhat of the same. But I want to draw your attention to their funding. As you can see at the top, it shows a line of credit of $300,000 that they're getting a 3-year line of credit, which is a loan, at 8% interest, and they're going to pay that over 3 years, and that $300,000, as you note, is what's going to fund the salaries and the employee benefits for the 6 months of January through June of 2022. If you turn to the first page of this, it shows the pre-opening cash flow statement of this school's operations for January through June of 2021-22. And as you can see, the $300,000 on the revenue side with the cash, and the $300,000 that I just noted of the 3-year loan, that is the only revenue that this school has. So they actually come into opening this school without $1 cash on hand, and then they get a $300,000 3-year note to finance 6 months of salaries and benefits. My question, of course, was if this was Rutherford County or any county in the state of Tennessee or a municipal school system in Tennessee, the way to issue a multi-year loan, or what this is it's a tax anticipation note. We're going to pay for salaries and benefits for these employees we just hired in January, and then we'll pay that back at a later date. Typically, a county or city in Tennessee, if they were to do a tax anticipation note like this, the state comptroller would require them to pay those proceeds back by June 30th of this fiscal year, of the fiscal year you issued the note. The state comptroller then, and they have, some of the rural counties, you'll see this, they would then step in and say, you have a liquidity problem, you have a cash flow problem, and we want to address to make sure this isn't something that's recurring. I reached out to the comptroller's office because I wanted to see, is this legal? Because once again, like Dr. Sullivan said, this is a public school in Tennessee. Is this legal to do a 3-year loan for 6 months of salaries? Because once again, they would not allow a county to do this. My response from the state comptroller's office in the department that approves debt said that they they do not have oversight. They do not have, our office has no oversight authority for funds borrowed by charter schools. So my point being is, I cannot tell you, it appears to be something that may be questionable legally to do multi-year financing in a public school, but since the comptroller says they have no authority, they would be the one that would approve all debt for, local governments, and including state government, which this is, it's a public school in Tennessee. So that was my first question is the legality of multi-year financing for salaries. Moving on, if you noticed on this first page, they expend, on their cash flow statement, they expend virtually all of the $300,000 through the first year, and they arrive at, it's over on the right side towards the top, they have $5,865 left at June 30th, 2022. This is right before they open up a 400, according to them, a 470 student school. So they're coming into this first year of operations with $5,865 cash of borrowed money to open a school. You'll turn with me to the third page. As I noted, this is the assumption for the enrollment and the staffing assumptions that was provided by the charter school. If you notice on the far left, it's got year 122, 23. It has 470 enrolled students. And then it shows 22 classes with those 470 students, and then it gives the makeup of the staff that they're hiring, with 47 full-time equivalent staff in the building. How they receive their funding is through state and the local match, Rutherford County taxpayer funds. And according to the charter school's estimates, they would be receiving $9,822 per pupil for that 470 students in year one. Turn the page with me to the fourth page. This is where it gets a little interesting. As we have worked on our budgets over the last several months for this current fiscal year, I've always talked to y'all, and Mr. Sandvig said the same thing of our growth funds. When we add new students, the way the BEP works, we don't receive any of those growth funds until late January, beginning of February from the state. So as a county school system, our local taxpayers have to take care of those growth positions for any of these students moving in. Notice on this fourth page, by state statute, this school system, this charter school, will receive their funding for those 470 students if they have that 470 enrolled on day one of this coming school year. They will receive their BEP every single month starting in August, just like these were existing students. Here's the issue. They'll be sending us the invoice to say, hey, send us the money in August for these students. We won't have any of that growth. If you notice, they're budgeting for just under $5 million of state and local revenue for this school, for this coming fiscal year, which means until at least end of January, February of 2023, or I'm sorry, yes, 23, the Rutherford County taxpayers are going to pick up every dime of this. I want you to draw your attention on that July of 2023. It shows beginning cash on that cash flow statement. There's that $5,865 that they have on the beginning of July to start operations of this 470 student school. Look down at their annual expenses of $5,026,000. That cash on day one, $5,865, that is less than half of 1 day of operating cash on hand that they're opening the school with. This is a serious liquidity issue, serious cash flow issue. If there, as you drop down in that July column, as you note, they're stating they're bringing in $29,346 in cash, and they're expending $124,106. Well, that is a deficit well over the cash on hand they began the month with. So how are they not out of money right there, you ask? If you drop down below that, you see a change in accounts payable of $142,765. That means they're holding their bills in order to keep cash in the bank. They end July of 22. This is right before the doors open with the children in August, of $43,790 in cash on hand. The next month, as you can see their operations, their revenue's banking on, once again, the $9,822 per student, 470 students enrolled. If they are 7 students less than that projection, look at the bottom of August. They're anticipating, with the full enrollment, $61,952 cash. If they are 7 students short of their planned enrollment, they are at that point having to adjust their expenditures to even just have cash in the bank at the end of the first month that their students are there. Which means, some are fixed. There are some fixed costs you cannot adjust. I reached out to the charter school, and they said they would adjust if they these enrollment numbers did not materialize. As we've gone through the budget with our county school system, there are a lot of things that are fixed costs. And I don't know if teachers want to be told a week after they're hired they don't have a job. But then, once again, that's an issue they're going to deal with. My main point with this is there is a serious liquidity issue that it concerns me with this right here. One other thing that I have for you to look at is right here. This is just a couple pages out of the fiscal year June 30, 2020 audit report of Knowledge Academies in Antioch, South Nashville. This is managed, Dr. Stone, this is currently managed by saying...
Right, it is managed by NEI, which is the CMO, the Charter Management Organization of the proposed charter.
So typically you can look at sometimes, a lot of people will say, past performance, you can look at that for future. I want you to turn your attention to, on the second page in this, these pages from this audit report. This is audited by a certified public accountant. If you notice, this charter school that's just across the county line in Davidson County, as you can see, as of June 30th, 2020, they had $26,860,000 of outstanding debt on their books. And look up above there in note 7, it shows, once again, that line of credit. The line of credit that they had was $575,000, and it was on a variable rate that was floating. The argument could be with the school that we're looking at coming to Rutherford County was, well, we're using this line of credit for startup. This school here has been in operation since 2012. That line of credit is still there for liquidity issues, as we'll see here in a moment, that's not my opinion, per their auditor. If you look at the bottom of that page from this audit of this charter school, it says, as of June 30, 2020, the academy was in violation of its financial debt covenants on March 25th, 2021. The academy negotiated an agreement with its lender whereby the lender agreed to forbear exercising its right to accelerate the repayment of the outstanding debt of the $26.8 million. Renegotiated terms include the deferment of over 1.5, 1.9, and 1.9 principal and interest payments, and note the time this was due. June 30th, 2019, 20, and 21. They missed those debt payments for the last 3 fiscal years. Not enough cash. Please turn the page. Note 9 on the next page, loan payable. The academy received a PPP loan in the amount of $724,300. That was before June 30th of 2020. They received that in order to make payroll. And that was they were eligible for that because they're a non-for-profit. You know, a government, like the county would not be eligible to receive this, but since they're a non-for-profit, they were eligible to receive that. So they utilized that funding for operating costs. Drop down, and this is where I get concerned. This note has been in numerous years of this charter schools audit. Note 11, liquidity. The academy experienced a deficit change in net position on the statement of activities for the year ended June 30th, 2020, resulting in a financial debt covenant violation and an increase in negative working capital as of June 30th, 2020. The deficit change in net position was primarily caused by revenue reductions due to decline in enrollment for the year ended June 30th, 2020. Of course, that there could be the argument, you know, COVID has caused this. It has caused a decrease in our revenue because of the decrease in enrollment. Note the last page, on note 14, on the last page of this audited financial statements, it says, on a subsequent event, on March 16, 2021, the academy received a second PPP loan for operating costs in the amount of $789,000. So they had a second loan. So they're well over $1 million of these loans from the federal government in order to do their, you know, make their operating costs. Plus, they've renegotiated those debt payments that were due for the last 3 years. Like I said, this could be blamed for this fiscal year on COVID, but if you look back in their fiscal year ended June 30th, 2018 audit of this same school, this same charter school, their auditors in 2018, well before COVID, were noting liquidity issues, and they actually had a note saying there is a going concern problem with this charter school. And that's on page 31 and 32 of the fiscal year ended June 30, 2018 audit report, which is available online at the State Comptroller's office. So on page 20, on the next slide, you see the strength that I saw with this. The non-for-profit board structure could allow entity more flexibility with financial issues. They could do unique debt financing options, change their operating budget quickly, because unlike this county or the city school system, if they want to change their budget, you as the school board, the elected school board, you would vote for any budget amendment that was brought before you. It would then go on to our county commission. It would be reviewed by the Health and Ed Committee and the Budget Committee and the full commission of our elected county commissioners. With this charter school, as soon as their non-for-profit board approves their budget, there is no more, the county commission has no oversight. Even though all that funding that's going to be coming, several $1 million coming annually from Rutherford County taxpayers, this county commission has no oversight of that. Just send the money. The concern was, I just pointed out, lack of transparency with budget, as county commission governing body that sets the property tax levy for Rutherford County citizens has no oversight of the charter school budget, nor do they have any oversight with the audit of the financial operations. Every county department in Rutherford County reports to the county audit committee. Any non-for-profit that receives money from Rutherford County taxpayers has to submit reports and is reviewed by the county commission every year. This charter school would not. Lack of oversight of the state comptroller for the debt issuance, restructuring of the charter school, despite the charter school being a public school. It's another concern. Lack of sufficient working capital for operations during pre-opening phase, with the school beginning operations without $1 of available cash that is not borrowed funds, per their numbers. And finally, low available funds, cash reserves for operations at beginning of the first year of school classroom operations could cause this school to become insolvent if enrollment numbers do not materialize quickly at the beginning of the school year as budgeted. And I want to make one caveat is, Any debt that would be outstanding, like what we just noticed, the 300,000 plus whatever else went on later with this line of credit, plus the other charter school we noted, the 26 million, it would not, according to what I received from the comptroller, that would not fall onto the county. You know, it would be on that non-for-profit. But guess who makes those debt payments up until its point of default? That would be Rutherford County taxpayers and state BEP funds that were then diverted from Rutherford County schools. So up until that point, it's taxpayer funds funding this. And that's my part there.
Thank you, Mr. Bodery. And just to kind of finalize, I do want to bring up that, where there was some contention about whether this was an charter school in operation or not in operation. NEI actually took over Knowledge Academies in 2019. So some of that debt that you're seeing from Knowledge Academies is before they took over. However, those financial issues are still a concern. You will see for Section 3, as Mr. Bodery recommended, and the committee recommended, was that it did not meet the standard as well for Section 3. Section 4, based on the letter from the commissioner, would not be applicable because it was deemed that they were not in operation. And kind of finalizing that, I do just want to remind you of tomorrow. Your choice for tomorrow, if the application, again, you have the choice to approve, RCS and the applicant enter into a chartering agreement, and then if it's denied, the charter will have 30 days. And again, I want to thank our committee because this is a very long, tiring process and looking out for the betterment of our Rutherford County students and our taxpayers.
Mr. Bodery, what is the projected fiscal impact of 470 kids for the Rutherford County School?
According to their numbers,
Yes.
and of course I disagree with some of their numbers, but I'm just going off their numbers, they would receive the first fiscal year in operation with children starting this next fiscal year would be $4,804,340 that would be diverted that would otherwise be in Rutherford County, and that Rutherford County schools, and that would include state BEP funding plus local match of the BEP, the maintenance of effort that Rutherford County taxpayers provide. That's the impact.
Mr. Young, if I may. Theoretically, would vouchers help? I mean, are we looking, I'm concerned that there's no money here. I mean, that's like going on a field trip with no money. And we know vouchers have always been, something that they want to get pushed through. Would they theoretically be better off if they had vouchers?
In a different subject, I'm just prepared to speak on the charter school tonight, ma'am. And and that's, like I said, it's that I just looking at the impact of what this would do. And of course, one of the arguments of this revenue, they would say, well, you would have to have bought some desks and some supplies, and you would have to have hired a teacher for those students, those 470 students, if they stayed in Rutherford County schools. What we're looking at here with this charter school, since it is a separate public school, we are looking at the creation of the third public school system in Rutherford County. We're growing government with this. Yes, I would have to budget, and the school board would have to approve this budget to hire some additional teachers for 470 children, but we would not have to create an entire new central office and all the other indirect costs that come with that. It would be more cost effective for the Rutherford County citizens to be able to just focus on our county system now.
Ms. Sharp, if I may, to kind of go along with that, one of the arguments is always about growth and whether or not that the schools needed one state board or one state action that will go into place next year deals with zoning and publishing open seats. And so there are options within our county to be able to take care of growth as well, but that's a different subject, one I wanted to bring up.
Thank you.
Well, for me as a board member, taxpayer, parent, grandparent, this is very alarming that we're allowing another entity to come into our state, into our county, a county that has a very proficient education system, and allow double standards like these to be played and take away from our funding. I mean, this is funding that this county desperately needs. As fast growing as we are, we need every dime we can get to operate our school system. And we're going to allow an outside entity from outside their state to come in here and make millions of dollars, or try to make millions of dollars, off Rutherford County taxpayers. It's just totally unacceptable, and it needs to be very transparent, and everybody needs to be focused on what's going on right here, because this is something that once we enter into agreement like this, we'll never get out of it.
And let me ask a question. In their application, was there anything that addresses out-of-county students?
It would follow the board, whatever our current board policy
Which
is,
is
to accept out of county.
correct. So they could reach over any county that's contiguous or any county period. Of course, it's not, I mean, the transportation thing is, I mean, that's up to them.
Since if our virtual school were to accept out-of-county students, then any other entity could as well.
Just as a quick point of clarity, one of the policies this board is considering is 1.903, just to give you all some idea of how a charter school would report to you on financials. I do think it's important that that's clarified. A charter school that entered into an agreement with the school system would have a reporting responsibility to the board, to the Department of Ed, and to the comptroller to submit an annual report, and that would need to include financial statements. And so there is a level, if you look through those draft policies that you'll be considering on second reading, it'll give you some insight into what kind of terms would be in a charter agreement and what kind of information you could expect to get from the charter school. That doesn't, there's also the enforcement mechanisms of what happens if we think that agreement was violated. So I do want you all to take a look at those policies. I think it'll make you, it gives you a little clarity on how it would look if the charter were to be opened, on what this board's authority was. So that should answer some of those questions for you too. But they would have to report financials to you annually. So just wanted to point that out for you all.
Any other comments? Any board members?
Oh, if I'm understanding this correctly, they're going to be front-loaded with the money where we get our funding in arrears. No?
By statute, they would, and Ms. Page could,
They receive BEP flow-through in the same method that the school system does. So it would be in installments just like we get it. So the statute basically says it's to mirror how we receive funding. So it wouldn't be, it would be flow-through. So as we receive it, we would pass on those ADM dollars and BEP funds to the school as owed for their enrollment numbers. So it wouldn't be a front-load issue. It would be pass-through.
Okay, so if something happens with the school and the student returns back to Rutherford County, then we don't get funding for that student until when?
It would follow the student like it would currently.
The only issue would be new students, which is the reason why I asked about the neighboring counties. Just like Mr. Bowdery pointed out, we would not get that. We would be, like you said, advancing that cash flow on new students.
that's correct. This, like we were talking, that first year, as we've discussed with our budget prep for the county, as we keep having 1,000 or more children each year consistently, we still have to staff for those new students in the fall, but we would not receive that BEP funding for those growth students until in January, February, some of it, and then the rest of it in the year. But the charter school, they would be receiving that first month. They would be receiving BEP funding from Rutherford County, which means we would be fronting that money for those growth positions.
Any other comments? All right. Number 13.
All right, number 13, Imagine Learning, found on tab 5. The instructional department is requesting purchase of Imagine Learning, an online personalized learning system developed to help students acquire, develop, and strengthen the language skills necessary to fully participate in academic settings and prepare for college and career readiness. The total cost of Imagine Learning for the 2021-2022 school year is $127.50 per student, and will be funded through Title I, Title III, Title IV, and IDEA funds.
Any questions?
Mr. Chairman, on this, and I guess this may be a Dr. Sullivan or Mr. Boderick question, because it says total cost of Imagine Learning, but it really isn't the total cost. If we don't know how many students we're talking about are going to receive this, I mean, is this a K through 5? Is it a K through 12 program? I mean, all 40,000 plus students, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, this strictly comes out of our Title I, II, and the federal funding aspect of it. So it's dependent on, this is the quote based on the enrollment we have in Rutherford County. And so we have our seats, and our ESL program watches the number of seats we have at a school. And so if we have 10 seats at a school and we have an additional one, that Imagine Learning, you will notice you probably approve this every board meeting, I believe, because as new seats become available and we have new student enrollment, we bring it back to you every single time. I feel like this is on there just about every board meeting.
Yes.
So, but I'd still like to know how many.
How many, I'll find out the exact number that we have for this, a proposed number for this coming school year that we have by tomorrow night.
Okay, thank you.
I think the key there is the federal funding also, where the funding's come from.
Any other questions? Hearing none. 14.
Fine Arts, found on tab 6, Smart Music, Music Learning and Assessment System. Instruction Department is requesting to purchase Smart Music Platform access from Make Music for all instrumental music teachers and students enrolled in middle and high school instrumental music courses for the 2021-22 school year. Continued access will provide enhanced curriculum assessments and support for middle and high school instrumental programs.
Any questions, board members? All right. Next.
All right, Quaver Music, elementary music curriculum. The instruction department is requesting to purchase Quaver Music program from Quaver Ebb for all Rutherford County elementary schools for the 2021-22 school year. This is the district's currently adopted elementary music curriculum. Access for all schools will ensure quality curriculum and alignment throughout the district.
Any discussion? All right. Next.
All right, next is the Art Education Visual Art Instruction Resources. Instruction Department is requesting to purchase subscriptions for the curriculum suite from the Art Education University for visual art teachers for the 2021-2022 school year. Each subscription provides the teacher with access to customizable instructional resources and content-specific on-demand PD.
Any questions? All right, next drama.
Drama Teacher Academy Theater Instructional Resources. The instructional department is requesting to purchase Drama Teacher Academy access for the full-time middle and high school theater teachers for the 2021-2022 school year. The access includes high-quality, content-specific instructional resources for theater courses. Access for all schools with curricular, which is done during the day, theater program will ensure equity and access to quality instructional resources throughout the district.
Any questions? All right, number 15.
All right, number 15, Special Education Contract, tab 7, License Agreement with Alexia. This agreement is to purchase reading intervention student license and training to address students with disabilities with deficits in reading. The district plans to purchase 1,600 student license with the training and support. The cost should not exceed $57,900 to be paid with IDEA Part B special education funds.
Any discussion? next.
All right, next is the license and service agreement for Insights to Behavior Software. This agreement is for district site license for behavior intervention software, which includes training modules for staff, behavioral tracking data collection tools, and software to assist teachers and staff in documentation required for behavioral intervention for students at a cost of $97,500 using transfer out funds budgeted through IDEA Part B for CCTEIS Early Intervention Services.
Any discussion? All right, next.
Next is a contractual agreement with Special Kids Incorporated. The contract with Special Kids Incorporated is for special education related and nursing services. These services will provide speech, language, occupational therapy, physical therapy, nursing services to Rutherford County school students in special kids facilities. Hourly rates for therapy are $80 per hour. Daily rates for nursing services is $175 per day. The total cost not to exceed $25,000 during the 2021-2022 school year and will be paid through the IDEA Part B Special Education Funds.
Any discussion? All right, hearing none. 16.
So financial matters, approve of school activity fund auditor contract last fiscal year. The purchasing department solicited proposals for the contracted school activity fund audit, and school board approved engaging the audit firm. Matlock Clements CPAs for the annual financial compliance audit for school activity funds for fiscal year 2020-2021. This contract has an option to renew for another 4 additional fiscal years at the board's discretion. The annual audit cost for renewal option for the fiscal year 2021-2022 is $64,218, and the amount reflects the addition of Plainview Elementary activity funds to the audit fieldwork. Funding for this audit is already budgeted in our fiscal year 2021-2022 general purpose school fund budget.
Any questions?
Is this the auditor that we use to audit the entire county, all of the clubs and sports and things like that?
This audit is for just the school activity funds at all of our schools that have activity funds that our employed school bookkeepers maintain. The booster clubs, they're separate, non-for-profit entities, so they would engage their own CPA that would do agreed upon
Okay, that's
procedures.
what I was concerned with, yeah, because at the beginning of the school year, there were some of the small clubs that did not have any funds coming in, and they were like, do we have to still be, get a financial, get a CPA come on and look over our books, and they just didn't have the money for that. And I didn't know if we addressed that at all.
I think we worked something out, did we?
They always have the option that they can
Just run it through
and we actually had one that's in the process of doing this right now. One of those clubs is they have the option to wrap up operations as a separate legal entity outside, away from the school system, and they can they can donate the funds to and set it up in our activity funds, which is audited by this auditor that's paid by board funds. At that point, they would act as a club.
Okay.
And their financial activity would run through these audited.
Okay.
So they have an option to do that. If they're so small that they are like, hey, it doesn't make financial sense to be a separate legal entity, they are more than welcome to do like we've had a couple of them already do this year.
Okay.
Now, would they still be able to do fundraisers?
Yes, they would still do fundraisers as our clubs do.
Like as a donation? I mean, that
It would go directly to our books, and of course, once again, but they could utilize it for whatever they raised for that fundraiser, and they said, we're, raising for fill in the blank team, that's where the funds go. It's restricted to that team.
And that's primarily what those small clubs need to do is do it through our books. I mean, the large ones, they have the ability to pay for that
Yeah.
audit.
Football and baseball would be different than like maybe archery or golf.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Number 17.
Are we going to go through about 3 different, you want to take us through that? Because I think,
The first one is a request for Rockville Elementary Annex bid. On June 17th, 2021, Purchase and Engineering Construction received bids for the site work of the construction of the annex for Rockville Elementary. All bids have been reviewed, and Engineering and Construction recommends Robert S. Biskin. Base bid plus all add alternates for a total bid of $9,510,368. Engineering proposes moving forward to health and education with a request for funding in the amount of $12,085,368. You'll see the breakdown of that $12 million Biskin bid, construction-related contracts. Those two numbers are in the construction budget in your 5-year plan. They add together. FF&E, $850,000 designed for a total request of $12,085,368. That is less than what we had budgeted.
I'd also like to point out that with Mr. Lee coming on board, the transparency of breaking down each additional cost is very helpful. I know I'm specifically referring to construction-related contracts.
Yeah, that number's always been there, but it's never been separate. Y'all always saw one, I see
Rolled
y'all,
into
the
one.
school board is one big, as I called it, one big fuzzy number. But we're breaking that down. We started that with Plainview and Laverne Middle. The next one is a request for Rockville Middle School Classroom Addition on July 1, 2021. Purchase and Engineering and Construction received bids for the site work and construction of the addition of 22 classrooms for Rockville Middle. All bids have been reviewed, and Engineering and Construction recommends Robert S. Biskin Company based on the base bid of $7,087,000. Engineering proposes moving forward to health and education with a request for funding in the amount of $9,132,000. Similar breakdown, Biskin Construction's bid, construction-related documents, FF&E, design, total bid, total request, $9,132,000. Next is request for Smyrna Middle Annex renovation bid on July 15th, 2021. Purchasing and Engineering and Construction received bids for the renovation of Smyrna Middle School Annex. All bids have been reviewed. Engineering and Construction recommends Wright Construction Services. Base bid plus all alternates for a bid of $3,810,000. Engineering proposes moving forward to health and education with a request for funding in the amount of $5,535,000. There again, the same similar breakdown, Wright Construction, construction-related contracts, FF&E, design, total request for $5,535,000.
How does that cumulative amount compare to what we previously projected?
It's a little over $3 million less.
Mr. Lee, how many classrooms is that going to add for Smyrna Middle?
It'll add about 14 classrooms.
What about Rockville?
Rockville Middle or Rockville Elementary?
Well, one of them's 22, what's the other
All
one?
right, Rockville Middle's 22, Rockville Elementary is about 25. There's a couple of small rooms that are listed as classroom, but they're pull-out intervention. They're technically classrooms, but they're not full-size classrooms.
Is this firm that we're using the same one we used when we did the other annex additions or?
Rockville Elementary is very much similar to Rock Springs Elementary. It's the same footprint. There's a couple subtle differences in the classroom based on the demographics of the area, but for all intents and purposes, it's the same building. The last one is the Central Magnet Annex HVAC bid. You'll think we've done this before, and we have. When we did the original Central Magnet HVAC about 18 months ago, that total bid was over budget, so we cut the annex portion out. We had planned on using ESSER 2 funds, which we still are, for the funding to complete that project. With ESSER 2 and all of the other ESSER projects, it falls under the Davis-Bacon Act, which means we have to follow the federal wage scales, which is different than what we do locally. When the contractor that is doing that project, he agreed to do it for his same bid price that he bid it at 18 months ago, but based on Davis-Bacon, he could not meet that requirement. So we've had to put that portion of the project back out for bid. We are receiving the bids tomorrow at 2 o'clock, so I will hurriedly, not erroneously, but we'll go through the bids prior to 5 o'clock, and I'll have you a name and a dollar amount at the 5 o'clock meeting tomorrow night, because we get our bids at 2. And we need to get this going as quickly as possible because of the time frame limitations on the ESSER 2 funding. We need to get that contractor going so that he can get finished. I'll have that for you tomorrow night. The next thing I have is the CMTA ESCO report. As promised, this is our not EESI, but it's our ESCO program that we've been looking at. This is their, I'm not going to call it the final, but we're close, final report. I'm not going to ask you all to read through all of this. What we have done tonight is pared it down to what we feel like is an overview, and we'll give you a lot of information. And with the intent of coming back at our next board meeting with a motion of where we want to go, but we wanted to present the program to you tonight. It's on your screen, but I've also provided you with a paper copy. With us tonight is Mr. Jason Bolts with the CMTA, and he's going to go up to the podium and present the slides.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you to Mr. Lee, Mr. Walls, Mr. Beaudry for their help in developing that big report as well, because there's a lot of information in there. I didn't just make it up myself. It all had to come from your all staff, so they've been very helpful along the way. Back in March, you all selected CMTA to develop an investment grade audit. What that is looking at what opportunity an energy program can do for you all. Next slide, please. There we go. So what is high level? What is an energy savings performance contract? It is taking money that you're already spending on utilities, operation, and maintenance, and where there is excess being spent, taking that away from TVA and putting it back into your facilities. So the pie chart on the left there is your existing utility costs. The pie chart on the right is your moving forward, what it would look like, where it's the same size of a pie, but instead of that money going to TVA or MTE or your maintenance providers that are outside of Rutherford County Schools, they are now going into your facilities. And annually, that is used to pay off construction costs for the investment that would go into your facilities. Next slide, please. So, starting off with the big number, what do you all spend annually when it comes to utility costs? And that spend is right around $12 million between electric, gas, and water, with the biggest coming from electricity. Next slide, please. And that's a 3-year average. We don't like to just take one off, especially with COVID. Even though you guys were full capacity, there's still a dip because of a few less students in the buildings here and there. That's a 3-year average to give us a good idea of exactly what you all spend. Overall, when benchmarking your facilities versus other facilities in the state and really regionally, we use a metric called EUI, which is energy usage intensity. What that is all of the energy that goes into a square footage divided by that square footage allows us to compare your larger facilities at Riverdale High School versus a smaller school, David Urey Elementary. Obviously, the elementary school is going to use a lot less energy, but when we divide it by square footage, it allows us to give a good metric. And the higher the number, the worse. So we want to see those numbers low. And the average school in Tennessee is at a 50. You guys are above average, and 63 and above average being bad in this scenario. CMTA, after we come through and renovate facilities, we typically see ours in the 29. If we've got a new construction from ground up, we focus on 19 being our goal. Next slide, please. So looking at all your facilities, you've got a lot of facilities, obviously. There's a lot of things going on. That EUI ranges from very high at Laverne Middle down to very low and very efficient in Rock Springs Elementary, and a lot of your, Oakland Middle School, your newer facilities that are geothermal, all LED already, those facilities are performing very well. It's just like when we look at the vast quantity of buildings that you have, you've got a wide range there. Next slide. This is the opportunity that we see in front of you. So we would take your average from a 63 down to a 41, beating that Tennessee average. We're very conservative in the way that we look at our savings. We would very likely beat these numbers, but this is what we would be willing to guarantee if we went forward with this type of project. And the real focus on this report is, what is that worth? That's a lot of energy that we'd be saving. Next slide, please. And it's worth around $3.1 million, depending on how we look at this. And that $3.1 million, when used to finance over a 15 or a 20-year period, which we'll talk a little bit in a second, can finance quite a bit of facility improvement. Next slide. So what does that look like if we look at a 15-year project? The RFP that we responded to was focused on a 15-year savings project. What that would accomplish, scope items, the major takeaways would be LED lighting in every single facility across so we would be matching the lighting standards of your new facilities that are all LED. We would be improving those across the board at all of your facilities. In addition, we would be renovating 4 HVAC systems completely and 1 partial renovation, as well as ventilation improvements, which is a focus of Mr. Lee's program that he wanted us to look at. All in, that is a big accomplishment, a big opportunity for your all's facilities, of an investment in your facilities of $50.6 million, but overall $3.1 million in utility savings is paying for that. So budget neutral is the goal of these projects. We did spend a lot of time looking at renewable, because that's, it's everywhere you look now. We want to make sure that we're turning over every stone. Unfortunately, in TVA, there's no longer very good financial incentives to put renewable energy out there. Doesn't mean that it's not a bad investment. It's just it's not going to pay for itself within the time period that we, the 15-year time period or the 20-year time period that we're looking at. But we looked at 5 to 6 different schools, all on different utility rates, just to make sure that we were looking at all of the different facilities, making sure we tried to find it, and none of them paid for themselves below 25 years. Next slide, please. There is, the RFP focused on a 15-year option. There is a 20-year option that you all can utilize. The code that mandates this program through Tennessee does not dictate a length of program. The new program that is focused on state-specific facilities, so it doesn't govern you all specifically, is based around a 20-year program. And there's multiple examples of K-12 local government projects that are out there that have done 20-year paybacks. And the reason why I bring that up is if you're looking to stretch the dollar or stretch the way that this program can work, next slide please, you can, for about the same amount of utility savings, get 5 more years of excess savings. And the idea that CMTA brings to the table here is we're trying to invest in the infrastructure that has long paybacks, so that extra 5 years goes to many more HVAC renovations and many more, so basically it's all going into HVAC, that additional $20 million. So you can go from a $50 million program up to $72 million program. Again, the whole idea of this IGA report, investment grade audit report, is to show you the capacity that this program can accomplish. Next slide, please. We spent a lot of time over the last 3 months. We've had a whole team of engineers walking all the facilities and then also looking at all the utilities information that we just went over. But where we like to start is a master plan view. And this is looking at all of your facilities and identifying the infrastructure needs inside of them as they age. So over the next 10 years, you guys have been building a lot of schools. Those are all new, but you also have a lot of other schools that are aging. And 34 of those facilities in the next 10 years will need complete mechanical system replacements. That represents $125 million in investment in those facilities. So this program by itself cannot address those needs. Outside of this program, we would need a coordinated effort of 3 HVAC renovations annually moving forward, just so that you guys can stay on top of what's coming. So that's there's a whole section, a write-up in the report that you can review if you please. Next slide, please. So, just putting this on a graph, if you all did nothing over the next 10 years, the red line would be no major renovations. You'd be at 34 systems that are at the end of their life or failing at that point in time. Right now, you're at 9. It's manageable. Trey has a program that is addressing some of these, but it's not addressing everything. So if you went down the path of looking at the performance contract or the energy program, there are 2 different options that laid out there. There's a 15-year option and then a 20-year option. You can see that the 15-year option takes care of a few over the next few years. The 20-year option takes care of a few more. And then the blue line is pairing that energy program with doing 3 additional facilities every year, and that's your move forward plan on the master plan review. Next slide, please. Financially, what does this mean if you would look at those 4 different options? So in general, if you did nothing, in 10 years you would be in the need of $125 million just for HVAC systems when looking at it. And currently, Trey, and don't let me speak for you, Mr. Lee, there's a $36 million 5-year plan out there to take a chunk of that. And really, he's focusing on replacing major pieces of equipment, where our number is focusing on full system replacement, putting the exact right system in where it needs to be, and matching the standards that you've been putting in your new facilities. Depending on which option, 15 or the 20-year option, we could either be contributing $16 or $36 million from this energy program into that number. So still there's a delta that would need to be identified on filling out that funding need, but this could be a first start. Next slide, please. I think that's it. So I know I just crashed course there. Any questions for me or Mr. Lee?
Lee, would you explain to us the variance from Laverne Middle School that hasn't completed the annex compared to that in Blackman Middle and Oakland Middle?
Okay, so the short version is, without going too deep into the weeds, Laverne Middle 2002 or 4, and Blackman Middle was the other. Those systems were built, they're called 4-pipe systems. We use geothermal now, which they basically do the same thing. If a room gets too cold, we can have heat. If it's too hot, we can have cooling. So you can have both any time of the year. With what we do now, which is Oakland Middle, it's geothermal. It's high-tech. It's basically very simple, and I use that term because basically what we do is take our water, that hot air blows across. We're using the Earth's surface at 55 degrees. In the summertime, we're taking 100-degree air, blowing it across 55-degree water, and raising it up, lowering it down to somewhere around 75 to 78. So we're using the Earth to get a large portion of our cooling, and I don't want to say free, but it's basically free because we're using that to do it. So then we're only cooling from that number down to where we need to be, which is significantly less. With a 4-pipe system, we're going from whatever the outside air is down to what we need it to be. And typically you go lower in the summer because by the time it gets dispersed through your ductwork, it loses some temperature and some things like that, so I didn't want to go into the weeds. But
Is this something that, geothermal, we've been doing that back?
we started with Stewart's Creek Elementary. That was the very first one we did. If you'll notice, on all of our geothermal schools are in those bottom schools, and they're performing very well.
Right.
So I say all that to say this: Laverne Middle and Blackman Elementary, they were state-of-the-art. But when they were built, they did not necessarily deal with humidity as a design element back then. So what we're running into is a system that was very complex. It's at the end of its life, and because of its complexity, it's fighting against each other. You've got temperature swings where the heat and the air both may be blowing at the same time. And it's because it's old, it's wore out, and the system is very complicated and it's very difficult to keep it balanced. Geothermal, I don't want to continue to use the word simple, but it is, compared to a 4-pipe chiller, cooler, boiler system. And they're at the end of their life, which makes them more problematic. And what this report shows, my 5-year $36 million, which you saw in the Fund 177, was low. Because if you take $125 million over 10 years, 34 schools, we were anticipating trying to Band-Aid, change out equipment, and what we have found out is it's that so far gone that it needs to be completely replaced with something similar to what we've done at Central Magnet or somewhere else. And each school, you can't look at all of them and say one size fits all. We would be analyzing each individual building and looking at what's there and how can we best utilize. So what system may be recommended for a David Urey wouldn't be the same as a Smyrna Primary. Mm-hmm. The real problem, what this has shown, is we're further down the road than I anticipated. As far as, I did not anticipate 34 schools. I just didn't, I assumed we had done some renovations along the way, and we have not.
And some of the, there's a color coding to that plan. Some of them were already identified by Mr. Lee's program, and then some of them have been added, depending on the color code, from our walkthroughs to identify it.
So we're really needing to look at $4 million over 3 schools, about around $12 million a year is what we're more realistic, is what?
Yes, sir.
I think it's 12.5.
12.5.
That would be pretty close, yes, sir.
Just going back to the existing conditions, it's just really alarming that some of these schools that are showing inefficient compared to some of these there at the bottom that's showing somewhat efficient. So,
And most of the ones at the bottom are our newer schools with geothermal, a large portion of them.
yeah, I just noticed in Las Casas and Rock Springs being 2 of the better ones.
Yes, sir.
Is that geothermal out there?
No, sir, they're not. But some of those systems are 2-pipe, which mask it. They either have heat or cool.
Right, they don't have the ability of creating the comfort level the other facilities have. They either get heating or cooling, and they fight each other, or nobody's happy in that scenario.
No, sir, believe me, I'd like to transfer a few calls. But I do want to say one thing, and CMTA and our other engineers have all said they cannot believe we've kept a 30-year-old system running.
I 100% reiterate that. The staff that you all have on the HVAC side of things specifically keeps things going, and they know.
But we're to the point where we can't get parts anymore. They just don't manufacture them. And we're faced with spending large sums of money to replace a component of a bad system.
Mm-hmm.
How many different plans do we have out there? You said geothermal, you said
HVAC?
4-pipe, yeah. I mean, because
Oh,
I know
it's-
that
I'm
how
gonna
old
say
the central
somewhere-
magnet
Half
was.
dozen,
I was going to say somewhere around 15 different types.
I know what years they were built, so if they had the same original from when they were built, I mean, good golly.
Yes.
yes, they do.
That's what is there.
So there hadn't been much renovations.
Basically, Oakland and Riverdale's or Smyrna High and Laverne High, it's those same systems. Now, we've been able to make minor changes where we've changed the controls. There were pneumatic controls, and I'm fixing to go way off into the weeds, which I don't want to do, but they had, it's air. And it's very, very, very difficult to maintain, and there's very few mechanics left today that can even work on them because they've all retired. We have been able to change most of those over to Delta controls, which is an electric. The problem is I've got a high-tech control on a low-tech piece of equipment, and there's only certain information we can get from them, and there's only certain things we can do to control them. We can tell something's down, but I still got to send somebody out to figure out what it is.
If we eventually can fix the problem, well, I'm just going to tell you what the problem was at school that I was at, and I'm assuming Oakland was the same thing. You didn't know from one, even though we turned the heat on, we got it on, this room over here could be blazing hot, and this room over here could be ice cold. And it was constant, and they could be within 2 doors down from each other.
Right, and
There was no consistency. I mean, that would be great if eventually we could.
That's part of that pneumatic control problem. So
I didn't realize it was the same one since
And
72.
so, the other side of that is comfort issue, but every time you see that one room's really cold, one room's really hot, there's an energy,
Yeah, that's.
I mean, that's
cost
energy going out the door.
associated with it.
And that's what you're seeing in those inefficiencies.
And I know it's a lot of information to digest, so over the next few weeks, feel free to call. I'll be glad to go into it, with any of you.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, next is the AT&T cell tower request. AT&T, through its agent Mastech, has provided drawing and an easement paperwork to allow installation of a new cell tower to improve cell service in the downtown area of Murfreesboro. Engineering and Construction has discussed this request with Murfreesboro City Planning, and they approve or disapprove of this request, depending on what the board votes. This is similar request to what we reviewed at Stewart's Creek. The major difference is the request falls in the current utility easements along Main Street already in place. Anything you want to add to that?
Yes, sir, I do. I have recently been able to get back with Murfreesboro City Planning. They had trying to internal, because they are doing some things in the downtown area. They do not recommend this approval. And I would recommend that we go along with the city if they don't want it. That would have been my whole thing. If it was something the city was pursuing, I knew they're doing some upgrades down there. And the folks at planning wanted to make sure this wasn't one of the things that they were trying to get in, but they do not recommend this. So I'm going to recommend that we go along with the city planning, seeing how it is in the historic district, and that you all would vote to disapprove.
Any questions? All right, next.
All right, next one's for information only. Rocky Fork Elementary Eagle Scout project that was approved previously by this board. The request from Braxton Johnson to allow clean up the town cemetery located on the Rocky Fork Elementary and Middle School campuses is now complete. Engineering has plans to keep the area from becoming grown up in the future. This is a very successful project, and we hope to partner with more Eagle Scout projects in the future. And I think there's some photos that are attached. We always have a great return when we work with the Eagle Scouts. We've had all throughout I can remember as being in Oakland, we had trees planted. They did a fabulous job, so we do appreciate that hard effort on their part.
This is the third one that I've had the privilege, I guess, of helping them see to fruition, and I agree, all three of them have been great.
Any comments? right, number 18.
Insurance update.
We're having our meeting tomorrow at 1, so we'll have an update tomorrow night.
Number 19.
All right, a couple of things. Tomorrow we'll be meeting with all of our all of our Rutherford County school principals at Siegel, beginning at 8:30. We'll be going on a multitude of things. I'll be having an update on that when we get finished with that meeting for tomorrow night's meeting. Also, to call your attention to an issue that's probably going to rear its head sometime here this year, but we're having an issue with being able to acquire food for our food service programs. We're being told to be aware because of a kink in the pipeline, and it's really been created, believe this or not, through something that's pretty prevalent around here. Jobs are being unfilled. So what happens then is it's reducing the amount of quantity that's being produced. And guess which two largest states in the United States are going back in traditional learning? California and New York, which are getting a bulk of that. So what we're doing is looking at, and we're monitoring this. There will be two things that we'll do if we run into any issues. Number one, we'll request a waiver from the state to go off bid and purchase other items. Number two, we may request a waiver to waive the caloric value of food. As we all know, several years back, that was put in place in terms with the United States Department of Agriculture in terms of caloric intake of a type A meal. So those are the two things. I applaud Eric for getting ahead of the curve. It could happen very easily.
I can attest to that. I'm waiting on trucks right now, so it's affecting businesses. All right, any questions? All right, no TLN tonight. FRN? Okay. General discussion? All right. Hearing none, we are adjourned.